start letting people in after I see it.
Okay.
Yeah, let's start letting them in.
All right, here they come.
Gavin. Phone calls. See the screen now. I'll see. I'm gonna. Oh. Oh.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Biomedical Research webinar. I am proud to serve as the Deputy Director over Public Health Research and directly responsible for the Biomedical Research Grant Programs and the Institutional Review Board for the Department of Health. I'm going to give it just a minute. Sorry about that, guys. All right, we had a bunch of people. Okay, just log in. Okay, so today is to talk about updated forms that will be used for the management of your research project, your quarterly reports, and other important information. We will be showing you enhancements that we made that should make it easier for you to complete the required documents. I wanted to let you know that the webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our website. It will be found in the forms library. Okay, we're going with each with each enhanced form, we will go through and talk about the enhancements and then stop for questions and answers before we move to the next section. Additionally, please use the chat feature for submitting your questions. And with that, I'd like to introduce two biomed staff members who will be assisting today. First, we have Ernesto Diaz, who is a biomedical research grant manager and our advisory board liaison. He is going to be working the chat for us. And Cheryl Mosley, who has the lead role for the contract managers and for assisting with processing the invoices, working with the grant managers, etc. And she will be providing the webinar today. I'll turn it over to Cheryl.
Good afternoon, everyone. So thankful for all of you that have jumped on with us this afternoon. If you have any of your staff that were not able to attend the webinar, please let them know about the recording that will be on the forms library so that they can review that in advance of preparing the July 31 invoice submittals. Over the last year, we've had quite a few changes that have occurred because of the Department of Financial Services and within Department of Health as well. There's been an uptick in some of the changes and corrections that were required of us. And we've tried to kind of hold our own and keep pace with those changes. But July is typically our time of year where we look at our processes. We also look at our forms and try to determine what corrections and enhancements and that type of thing need to be made for this year. And so, we've gone through that step, and today is a culmination of all of the changes on those forms, and we want to try to lay out what all has been changed. The last 2 years that I've been here, there's not been that drastic of a change from one year to the next. Signature block type changes. This year, there's quite a few significant changes, so we just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page. One of the things that of particular note in the last 2 invoice cycles has been the electronic signature attestation. And that has been quite a hurdle for us to overcome. And it seems like, we maybe wishful thinking that it would go away, but it is not. It is with us to stay. And so we've had to adapt. Section 668.004 of the Florida statutes does very briefly discuss that electronic signatures can be allowed. DFS has in concert come out with an actual statement, a standardized statement that is supposed to be in every invoice at every place that there is a signature point. We can't get by with just sending one and it'd be good for the whole packet. It has to be inserted at every appropriate spot. So I have gone in and added those in so that that's more convenient for everyone than sending these attachments with the statement on it. And then if one's missing, we have to hold the invoice and catch it up to the packet. Our biomedical research grant program is also developing efficiencies for our internal data management and in monitoring processes this past year with the lift on some of the travel. There's some push now to pick up and monitor where the last year and a half or so, maybe 2 years, we have had those restrictions and have not been able to go out and monitor as frequently as we're required to. And so we're, coming up with ways that we can, with 250 open grants, about 183 that are active, we really have a task ahead of us to schedule those next year and perform those monitorings either by a desk review or through an on-site review. So there's more to come on the horizon for that. The biggest change that I want to, that you'll visually see is that we've moved from Word documents to Adobe fillable forms. And so there are some restrictions that have been placed on some of the fields in terms of word count. Some of the restrictions have to do with the font size, things that are real generic in nature. And then also prohibiting one of the problems that we found on one of the Word documents is that we had put a box there in the hopes of, restricting to 500 words when there was a little paragraph marker there that caused, if you happened to click into the blank space, it allowed you to write a book. And so that doesn't help us when it comes time for preparing the annual report that goes to the governor and the legislature. So we've tried to streamline some of those forms in that manner so that it will help us in preparing those documents, as well as moving forward with monitoring better grant reconciliation at the end, at the final stages of a grant, as well as ongoing tracking of expenditures and being able to review your invoices a little better. All right, what we're going to go over today are the requirements that will impact both the grantee and our grant managers. Some of these enhancements have been to try to help you, such as the electronic signatures, whereas some of the little nuances that are changes on the forms, maybe things that we have to do on our side to process the invoice packet. So hopefully those changes are not going to be too cumbersome for you all. And your grant manager is available to you for technical assistance and questions on this. So we're going to try to go through this very thoroughly and answer your questions today, but that is not the end. So if you have questions that come up as you're preparing your July invoices, please do contact your grant manager first and foremost. And then you can also contact me or email the research email address, and someone here will field that question and triage that to the right person to answer that. Let's get started with the invoice first. Okay, one point that I wanted to just reiterate as a reminder is that the invoice number up in the right corner here, that invoice number can be your agency's specific auto-generated invoice number that comes from your system. I think in the past that it's possible that somewhere we may have said it must be the grant number with the whatever payment it is. That does help us in terms of tracking the payment, but the financial report has that information on it. So it is somewhere else in your packet. Why it's important on the invoice, and you can use whichever method you want. You can use your grant number -1, grant number -2, and so on. Or if you have a specific number, the M00123456 or some similar number, you can use that number. Just make sure it's an invoice number, not your agency's award number. It does specifically need to be an invoice number, and that's important because that's what goes into our electronic payment system, and it goes into Flare, and it's a reference number for your invoice. Okay. And DOH grant number is the 5-digit number that is assigned to your grant in the beginning on your award letter. The next sections here with the institution's official name and the remit to address is the same, which just looks a little different. It's going to have a box, a highlighted box here, so you'll just click in the box and type your text. Same thing under remit, federal ID, your financial contact name, and your financial contact phone. I think in the past, the PI may have listed their name here. It is really supposed to be the financial contact. There's places on other reports where the PI is listed. Okay. The next section, we used to have just this little statement here that's in italics. That came under question from DFS this past year, and we, I guess you would say, had a compromise where we were allowed to leave that statement, but it really needed to be a listing of the deliverables that are part of the packet. And it comes off of the attachment 2. In our case, our grant award attachment 2 lists out all the deliverables, what frequency they're due, the actual due date. And then some of them are quarterly, some of them are annual, and so on. So what we have to do is check whichever ones, invoice, financial report, expenditure report, and progress report. You're going to send those in quarterly, every quarter. So you're going to have these radio buttons you're going to pick. They toggle between quarterly or final. So you could click quarterly, or you could click final, and the one goes away and the other is selected. So that's a toggle, whereas the boxes are checks. They'll just put a check mark there. All right, your proof of liability, please refer to your attachment 2 for the due date. Those are due annually based on your renewal period for your insurance. And that's different depending on the type of institution, whether you're a public university, private university, not-for-profit. Your renewal date may be different. It has nothing to do with the fiscal year. It has nothing to do with your fiscal year end either. It has to do with the renewal date of the policy. So if there's any change in that, please let your grant manager know right away. Otherwise, we have that listed and it's in your attachment 2. Just make sure that we have it listed correctly. The legislative report, you're going to mark either annual or final. There may be a couple of folks that have the older grants from, I believe, from 2018-19 fiscal year back, and you may be at the end of those grants. They did not have language in there for a final. However, it is helpful for us to have a final because otherwise we don't have the paragraph, the summary that we need to go in the annual report. And so this is your chance to shine. And so, and to really report and put out there in a general audience statement, the success that you've had with your project. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to that report. You're going to have your period covered. That has not changed. Invoice amount, that has not changed. The attestation here for the electronic signature. And then the person who signs this form is usually the financial director or fiscal agent for this grant. Please note that all deliverables are to be uploaded to PeerNet. Invoices will not be processed for payment until all deliverables are received and approved. Most of the time, there are some corrections that need to go back and return to us. And so just be aware that there is that process that has to go on until they are approved. You have 10 days to respond to our requests. And so sometimes if the sooner you can respond, the better. But sometimes there are those number of days of delay because it may take that long to make certain types of corrections, some more than others. All your deliverables must be received prior to the due date that's listed in your attachment 2. There are financial consequences that will be imposed for lateness. And so please get with your grant manager sooner than later if you see that you have a problem meeting that, and your grant manager can advise you on how to proceed. We don't want to impose those financial consequences as a general rule. We don't like them any more than you do, but it's a part of the legalities of the grant agreement. So we'll try to help you as much as we can. This section is mostly for us. Again, we had to add our attestation statement as well. Okay, any questions on the invoice?
I have a question.
Okay.
The signature on this, are you looking now for the electronic signature yet, or no? I'm a little confused.
That is a good question. Back during the COVID lockdowns, where everyone was working from home, the ones that could, we had the review and approval processes had to change drastically in order to keep things moving. And so we created these electronic signatures and methods so that we could keep the invoices moving and process them. And so what happened is there's either one of 3 types of signatures that exist and are being used right now that are valid. One, you can print the paper out or generate the report and print it out and manually sign it. It then, as part of the package that comes to the department, is usually converted at some point at the end to a PDF. It technically becomes an electronic signature at that point, technically. Second of all, You can create your own electronic signature by signing a blank sheet of paper and converting that signature to an image, which then can be inserted on the signature line. That is also a valid electronic signature. The third method is by using either Adobe Sign or DocuSign and having what's called a certified signature. And there's a certified history that comes with the documents and so on. And we're finding that more and more of the institutions are using Adobe Sign or DocuSign to process these packets before they come to us and are uploaded to PeerNet. So I hope that answers your question. And the one that is not valid, I will go ahead and stick this in now, is using a signature where you go to the line and you type in and put it in script font. That is not a signature. That's just simply anybody can type that name. That is not a valid signature. So, but all the other three are.
Okay, my concern was I know that you all had a concern with the certify. I know once we certify it, then it's a problem on your end trying to do anything else. So I thought we were not allowed to do it that way anymore.
We
But-
have done some preliminary testing with the form, but I will be honest with you, every institution and even within the institutions, there are different staff working these grants and these reports. So it's going to be a trial by error or a wait and see kind of a situation on where those problems crop up. And so we suggest gently that you work on your invoices and submit them, you know, as soon as you can. You certainly have your full amount of time until, I believe it's July 29th this time, because it falls on a weekend again, the due date. And so that Friday before the weekend is when it's due. So don't wait until the weekend, and certainly don't wait until the very last minute to submit, because then if there is a problem and we try to access and try to sign ourselves and we are, you know, the forms are locked out, as long as it's received, we can work with that, because then it's a correction. And as long as it's signed appropriately on your end, we will be able to document that it was received timely to avoid that financial consequence. But I know that what was happening is some folks were signing a certain way in Adobe Sign that was locking the documents. And so they had to go to a different method within that. There's two ways you can sign, and one locks the document, the other one does not. And so I'm not sure if that's what had to get worked out on your end or not, but just be aware that, and it may be that we all need to go to DocuSign. I'm not sure. We have not made that assessment yet, but we certainly will be looking at it with the new enhanced forms. And that may be something we have to look at and go a step further, maybe for the October submittal, based on what we see happening in July. The main thing to take away is please just submit your forms. These are not submitted electronically, like, you know, hit a submit button. These are still just forms. So in the end of the day, print it out, sign it, and get it to us as a PDF and get it in on time. That's the most that I can tell you. And if you see that there's some way that you can help the process, please let me know, because there's not a one size fits all solution. Because as I say, each institution probably has different ways and processes of their own that they have to comply with. And so we want to leave that flexibility, but at the same time, you know, some guidelines, parameters to stay within. All right, so we're going to move on. Here.
So there is a question in the chat. It says, if using Adobe Sign, if they flatten the document after signatures are obtained, it shouldn't lock the document. So it's a tip then.
Good to know. So flatten, is there a button or is there a menu? Is that a menu item? You've all been muted. You should be able to unmute yourself and answer whoever put that post up.
Same.
It's the same as print to PDF. go to the file, then Microsoft Print to PDF. Thank you so much, Melissa, for your tip. We appreciate you.
Yes, absolutely. That's what we're here for. We don't want to create something that is exclusive. We want to make sure everyone has the same information and can benefit from the enhancements. So thank you again. We're going to get to the next financial report, which is the Excel file.
Excel file.
Okay. The next one we're going to go over is the financial report and expenditure report. And that has been a combined Excel file this last year. I think last July is when we combined it as one with multiple tabs at the bottom. And what we had asked for you to do was to hide the budget categories for which you had no allocation. And so that was not being done consistently, if at all. And what we are really trying to arrive at is a cost savings on our part as well as your part for not having to print out 11 pages if there's only 4 that are categories that have an allocation. So let's say, for instance, you have personnel, supplies, other, and indirect. You would only need 4 tabs in order to adequately document and submit your financials. And so what we've tried, kind of the reverse logic on this form, is to create the financial report. This first page, the tab that comes up, is a set of instructions, and it basically highlights each of the fields and what's been changed and some instruction on how to proceed with that particular field. So please refer to the instruction tab. You'll have a lot of questions answered by referring to this tab. But the financial report looks the same, essentially. We have added the grant start date and the grant end date. And some of these changes have to do with, again, corrections that were requested either by our finance office and or DFS for some rule of theirs that we had to comply with. So we're putting the start date, the end date, and then we're going to have you mark with an X, or if you want to get fancy and put a check mark, it's fine, but just indicate here which quarter or if it's the final. One of the things we're trying to do is consolidate these forms into a single form rather than having a duplicate that looks exactly the same, except for at the top it says quarterly or final. And so we've consolidated some of these fields into one as opposed to, having a redundant form. So that part is fairly simple and forthright. The table here is the same, where you have your budget category, and these are set. They are straight out of your approved grant budget. And we would prefer that you not rename them or change them to try to make it conform to one of your categories. These have to match exactly what's in your approved budget, or it will be stopped in the audit process up the line from us. So you're going to enter your budget in the budget column. If you have a budget change request, you would change this total here to whatever your budget change amount is for that particular quarter that it's signed and approved on. Your expenditures this period, previous reported expenditures and expenditures to date. And then it's and then you're able to calculate your balance to date here. There were some formulas in the previous form. There were some formulas that linked and, the saying, read this total from this page. Those you'll see in just a moment, those totals down at the bottom have been taken away. And so the financial report is the only place where you're going to have the opportunity to do formulas to calculate your balance. And it's not going to be connected with totals that are on your expenditure report. Those expenditure reports are going to be our standalone reports, if you will, and they are now not linked with any kind of formulas. I think it was a little bit cumbersome, and it still had one that had to be manually entered, the previous reported amount, and so it kind of defeated the point, and it was a little bit redundant. So that's one way that we cut that out and streamlined this section. The only main thing I want to point out is that if we have to apply a financial consequence for any of the reasons, there are 15 of them in your terms and conditions where a financial consequence might be applied if there is a shortcoming on the reports itself, or if there is a programmatic requirement that is not met or satisfied. Then those financial consequences are being looked at a lot, being scrutinized a lot harder by our finance office as well as DFS. And they have on occasion this past year applied them, even though we kind of, said programmatically we're kind of okay with this situation. And it was not something that we deemed warranted a financial consequence. However, we were overridden, and finance and DFS applied those financial consequences regardless. And so, and in most cases, without us being aware that those had been applied until we researched the payment and noticed that the payment was less. And so we were alerted to that fact, and then we had to research why and pull up the voucher copy and be able to see who changed it and why. And there's notes, handwritten notes to that effect. And so we need to step up our game in terms of reviewing those by the terms and conditions explicitly and follow them. And so, as I said before, we really don't like to have to apply them. So if you find that you're in that spot, please talk to your grant manager. We're your friends. We're not the enemy. We're not the bad guy. We will bend over backwards and call whoever we have to try to vet your situation and make sure that we have an appropriate legal or financial ruling on it so that we can get your invoice expedited, and hopefully without those financial consequences. Okay. Sometimes there's situations where you have a participant payment, tuition, or travel in your budget. Those three categories of expenditures have additional documentation requirements. And that came out of about an 18-month back and forth with DFS, trying to educate them on what participant payments are, those incentives to try to it's to incentivize clients or patients into your research projects. And so we had to go to bat for that because they're technically considered advanced payments. And so those have a whole nother set of rules. And so there's documentation that has to be submitted with that. And most of you, I think, have submitted, if you have those in your grants, you have submitted those before. But if you're new and you're not sure, contact your grant manager and they will provide you some technical one-on-one assistance on exactly what's required and what pieces of paper need to come with the invoice. These are fixed price, fixed fee, but those three particular types have some documentation requirements in order for them to be paid. And so we have to jump through those hoops. In fact, travel has to comply with section 112.061 Florida statutes. And so all the restrictions and limits that are stated in that statute apply to the department. And then we pass that rule on to you all. Because you receive our funds, you have to fill in the right forms and stay within those limits and so on. And travel, incidentally, does include presentations, even if it's a virtual presentation. It falls under the travel expenditure category. And so we would need the proper paper filled out, authorization to travel voucher, and an agenda, the presentation itself. There may be a couple other pieces I'm missing right off the top of my head, but get with your grant manager if you have any questions on that. The certification that was there before that attests to the true and accurate and correct reflection of the expenditures, so on and so forth, that has not been altered. We added in the attestation here for the electronic signature block for the fiscal agent, printed name and signature and date. And then we also have a place here for our attestation with the grant manager's signature. Any questions on that page of this Excel sheet?
There was a question in the chat.
Should,
Okay, go ahead.
yes.
Virginia Perez asked, are those financial consequences going to be communicated to the PI/institution?
Yes, when we review and we are aware that a financial consequence should be applied, your grant manager should immediately email you with that information and let you know that, XYZ was incorrect, or you didn't meet, whichever section and criteria, and, state the reason and the amount, and let you know that up front. In some of the cases this past year, as I said before, we have looked at it and not applied that consequence when probably we should have. But because programmatically, we look at things a little different perspective than the finance and accounting staff. And so they looked at it from a totally different perspective and said, no, this has to be applied. So that is what's supposed to happen, is a communication by your manager. And then you have an opportunity with that to provide some additional documentation. Now, if you submit late, we can't help you. I've used this kind of rule of thumb that if you're, let's just say hypothetically, the PI is out of town and did not sign their report, and they're not going to be back in time to sign before it's due. But you have their quote unquote draft report, and maybe it's went through some review and it's considered, done or final, but you just don't have a signature. I strongly suggest you submit that, and then we write you back and say, you have a couple of corrections that need to be made on it. One is the signature, whatever. And then you have that opportunity it kind of buys you the time that you need to get that signature. And that may be not a very good example, but that is a real example that did happen. And so that was my suggestion.
Can I ask
Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask a question real quick? Just to follow up. So if there was something that was not, that we noticed the deduction on a payment and we've not been able to get an answer from your team, should we follow up directly with the Department of Finance and Accounting?
If you have contacted your grant manager and have not received a response on a reduction, whether it was a financial consequence or whatever, yes, contact, the next level would be to send something to the research mailbox. And you're always free to, and encouraged to send something to Bonnie. And so send something to Bonnie Gone Bailey, our deputy director, and indicate that, I have tried to get a resolution to this and have not had a satisfactory follow-up. And she will get with that grant manager and expedite the matter. And she'll also research it herself if need be, in order to determine what happened. And she'll either choose to write you back herself, or the grant manager will be instructed to do that research and write you back, usually before the end of the day. Unless it's late in the day, it might be the next day, but expeditiously. So please avail the research at flhelp.gov. That's our general mailbox, and it's monitored by several people daily and forwarded to the right manager and copied to Bonnie. So when those type of requests come in, they get immediate attention. Anything else on the financial report section?
Cheryl, there's another question in the chat. It says, it seems both the final invoice and the final expenditure reports are exactly the same on our site. They are listed in separate categories. Can the master sheet be used for both?
Okay, so say that again. The financial report is the same as what?
The final invoice and the financial expenditure reports are exactly the same on your site, although they are listed in separate categories. Can a master sheet be used for both?
Okay, so the invoice is a separate document. It is the cover sheet for the invoice packet. It is the official document that's recognized by finance and accounting, as well as DFS as the instrument for payment. Whereas the financial report and it provides the detail, if you will, of the expenditures, by category. And it's the breakdown of what your actual expenditures are versus what's on the invoice is your fixed fee amount that's listed in your attachment too. And those amounts may be totally different.
Yes,
so-
hi.
yeah.
I'm sorry, this is Veronica. I'm the one that posed the question. So just to clarify, my question was in reference to the way it's categorized on your website. You have two different sections, one specifically for quarterly deliverable forms, and under that, it has the one quarterly invoice, quarterly financial, and quarterly progress. Then there's another section that says grant final report forms. And under that section, there's three options: final invoice, final financial, and final cumulative. So my question was, when I open them, they're exactly the same. So
it looks, we just loaded those today. So I was under the understanding they were live. And so that sounds like, without seeing what you're seeing, it sounds like what was previously there, where we had separated quarterly deliverable forms and final deliverable forms, which are essentially the same, except, like I said, up at the top, it just says quarterly or final, but they look exactly the same. These forms that we're going over here have been posted out there. They may not have uploaded on the website, just as yet. It's in process. And so those have replaced or superseded those old quarterly reports and final reports. So those should go away and be deleted.
okay, thank you. Yes, the forms are actually uploaded. So the forms do match, just the categories are still separated.
Okay.
That's all.
Yeah, we may need to tweak that just a little bit because of the nuance of combining those forms now, so that we have one form as opposed to two separate quarterly and final forms. So we'll fix that. Thank you for pointing that out for us.
Yes, no problem. And then my second question is in reference to the cells. I know you don't have any formulas in there, but would I be able to go ahead and have the formula insert it myself and have it pull the total personnel fringe number instead of me having to go back and forth and manually type it in? Is that a problem once I submit? Because I know we used to submit both
Yes.
Excel format and the PDF format.
Yes, and this Excel form is more dynamic than trying to move it to the fillable forms, which can hold calculations, but not complex formulas. And so it was easier, I felt, for everyone, of the financial folks anyway, that you use Excel every day. It is much easier for you to tailor this Excel form here, or set of forms, to meet your needs. And I'll get into that specifics a little bit in just a moment. But yes, you can tailor this form there. The cells are not locked. And then we took that part away where it was connecting to the other pages. Although if you want to connect it, you can, but it's left to you to would say format as you please and what meets your needs. And, obviously what's more simplified for you.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure. Okay, moving on to the
Another-
personnel.
Another
Go ahead.
question in the chat. The chat question says, if the invoice is a final and the reporting period is fourth quarter, what box will I check?
Final. You only select final when it is the last invoice. And the reason for that is because there is a step that kicks into gear with a final invoice on our side with the finance and accounting office to let them know there's some closeout steps that have to go on, both on our part and in concert with finance and accounting, as well as the budget office in the encumbrance of the funds and that type of thing once that payment is made. And so in some cases, if it zeroes out the balance of the grant, meaning that you spent exactly the amount and documented your expenditures exactly the amount of the grant award, everything's good. But sometimes there's a refund due, or you may have overspent and we can only pay you a maximum amount that's allowed. And so that reconciliation goes on the final, and it must be marked final. And so if it happens to fall in the fourth quarter and it is also a final, you would mark final. And only if it is a final. If fourth quarter, if you have a multiple year, say 2 or 3 year, 4-year grant, you're going to go through several fourth quarters before you get to your last one, and that one would be marked final. Is that good? Okay. All right. So personnel and fringe, we had 2 tabs here because, as you know, the personnel and fringe has a little bit different fields of information that are requested from just the regular expenditure category. So we created a personnel and fringe tab. And one of the little nuances to the changes on this form is we have a monitoring process that is supposed to occur whereby we select a sampling of expenditures because it is fixed price, fixed fee. And we take that sampling and we have to put that onto another form, which is very redundant, and then answer a couple of questions, do some follow-up if we need to on the documentation part, and then sign off. And so we have tried to look at that internal form and add on the personnel fringe, we only had to add or change from the word date to date paid. And that put us in compliance with the monitoring requirement. And technically, you know, date could be anything. Is that when you obligated a purchase order or encumbered a subcontract or used a P card or a credit card to order something? What is that date? What does it mean? It does not, in some cases or all cases, mean date paid. It means something totally different. And so to clarify, we added the word paid. So we want to know, when is the date paid? Okay. We also need to know the check number, EFT, ACH, or other agency reference number for that expenditure. And we don't need the copy of the check. We don't need, you know, documentation that would normally come as cost reimbursement. With fixed price, fixed fee, there are certain assurances that we do through administrative monitoring that you have policies and procedures in place, checks and balances that, you know, assure that your books are kept properly and that type of thing. So all we need is that reference number. If there was an instance where something was that looked like we needed to research a little more, then your grant manager might ask for some clarification. For instance, might be on an expenditure that has a vendor name listed and maybe the description is not really clear. Sometimes it's an item number or something that is just, we can't tell what we paid for. And so those might be an instance where we have to have a clarification or some sort of backup that, and not necessarily a copy of documents as much as it is a clarification by email that would say, okay, that expenditure was for X, and you more fully describe what it is. Your grant manager might ask for you to revise your expenditure report in order to better describe the item. And that's certainly within bounds of, you know, an example of a type of correction that could be expected. Okay, so back to personnel, we have the name of the personnel, pay period, and the same columns for the pay period ending, beginning and end date, salary and fringe. That did not change. I do want to back up a second and look at the top of the form. I forgot that we have some things up here. When you enter the report type, you noticed before we had quarterly, and up here at the top, it said quarterly expenditure report, or if we were on the final, doing a final, it would say final expenditure report, but it was the same form. So what we did was we made a drop down where you're going to pick either quarterly, final, or if in some cases where there's a reduction to participant payment, tuition waiver, or travel, or who knows, some other weird reason that some reduction was made, and you have the opportunity to submit a supplemental, then you would select supplemental. And there's some particulars to go over with that with your grant manager. If you're ever in that situation, they will advise you on how to prepare that. Just be aware that financial consequences cannot be asked for on a supplemental. They cannot be recovered. They are what they are. They are a penalty for not doing something you should have done in the terms and conditions. And so we want to be real clear that financial consequences basically reduce the amount of your award. And it can't be recouped at the end. It comes straight off the award amount at the time that it's applied. And so that would basically change your dollar amount that you work with. It would affect your balances throughout the course of the remainder of the grant. So hopefully no one ever gets in that spot, but if you do, your grant manager can provide some additional guidance with that. Your grant number is you just free type in that box. The budget category, because this is a special sheet that's formatted just for personnel and fringe, it's the only option you can pick. Okay, so you would select that over under right side here with per period of service. Try to get over there. I'll get rid of that. Okay, there. Okay, so under period of service, you have another drop down. And you're going to select either first, second, third, fourth quarter, or final. Okay, again, only select final if it is the absolute last invoice. Okay, and then your budget category allotment, that is the dollar amount that is in your approved budget for that budget category. And down at the bottom, we have eliminated, as I said earlier, we've eliminated, there were like, four or five other totals that were on this part of the page down here. We have eliminated those because it's redundant of what's on the financial report. So all this is, there is a formula here. I did kind of tell a story. There's a formula here that picks up and calculates the total salary and the fringe. It adds those two together and puts it right here. Okay, but other than that, and then the columns are formatted to total. Very simple. We tried to simplify as best we could. All right, and so then the other part that has to do with monitoring is at the bottom of the form. You know, on the expenditure reports before, we did not require a signature from the grantee. However, with trying to meet a monitoring requirement, the grant manager is going to sign now. And we have to answer these two questions. Are the expenditures reported allowable in the approved grant budget or an approved budget change request? That's why sometimes if you are working, and it usually happens middle to later in the grant, you may see or project your budget is going to run over into a negative in a certain line item. You always need to submit a budget change request with that invoice in order to shore up those balances don't go over into a negative, because we cannot process your invoice if those balances are in arrears, in a negative. So please keep that in mind, and that is one thing we'll be checking off to make sure that they are within parameters. And then the question, does the data provided above meet the criteria for monitoring and testing by desk review? And so the grant manager and the deputy director will sign off on that, and that helps us satisfy a monitoring step that we have to do. Okay, any questions on the personnel and fringe
I
tab?
have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
No, never mind. I don't think it's personnel and fringe. It would be more for
A regular, we'll get to
expenses
that
that they
next.
paid. Yeah, sorry.
I did want to let you know, one of the flexibilities with keeping it in Excel is if you have a particular quarter where you have a lot of entries, you can simply, highlight, you needed 3 more rows, you can highlight that and insert rows and easily expand this. It may bump it to another page, so you may have to play with the page break, but you do have that flexibility to extend this expenditure report as much as you need to. I know at some point at usually the finals is when we see that, where you're trying to gather any final expenditures, or if you've had a no cost extension where it's crossed 6 more months, you may have a few more lines of expenditures that you need to enter, so that you do have that ability. Okay, so we're going to move on to the blank expenditure form. Now, as I mentioned in the example before, you have personnel, supplies, other, and indirect. So what you're going to do is take this blank form and you're going to right click and you're going to make a copy. Okay, you do that by clicking copy, and you're going to move it to the end or to here, wherever you want to put it. And then when you click OK, not on going to do it, but when you click OK, what would happen is you would create a replica of that form, and you're going to do that in this scenario 3 times. So you'd have one that you would name supplies, one that you would name other, and one that you would name indirect. And of course, if you have other budget categories, you tailor your workbook now to what you need it to be. You have the power. All right, so again, same issue here where you have a report type. Wait a minute. Report type is going to be quarterly, final, or supplemental. And then you're going to enter your grant number. Now on your budget category, you have a bigger list because you are going to pick whichever one is applicable. And of course, as you replicate these sheets, you're going to go in and set up this top part initially, one time, and then you'll have it set. Same thing with period of service. You're going to pick either first, second, third, fourth quarter, or final. And then you're going to insert your budget allotment here, which is off of your approved budget. Your categories, again, these were tailored to our monitoring step that we have to do. And so we need to know the invoice date, date paid, and again, the check number, EFT, ACH, or other reference number. Thanks. And then your payee and vendor name, this is a little bit different. Whereas before we just had item description, and sometimes what was happening is we would get a vendor name in there instead of the description of what the service or commodity was. And so we've separated those out now. So please put the payee and or vendor name, and then the item or service description, and then over to the right, you have the amount. Okay, again, putting that down, same thing where we have, I need to fix that bottom there so it doesn't break the page, but we have the same signatures here as with the other. This list data sheet is just simply the where we had lists, drop down lists. This is where it's contained, and the sheet is protected, so and passworded, so you won't be able to click into that and change anything. So it's just there though it feeds into those lists. Are there any questions? And we need to move on because I do have a couple of more forms to go through, and we're getting close on our time. So any questions? Is there anything in the chat?
Hey, Cheryl, there's a couple questions. Someone asked, is the signature at the bottom of the personnel and fringe need to be from the director, just like the invoice?
No, the signatures that are on the expenditure reports are for Department of Health. It's under this line here that says Department of Health use only. And so that represents our approvals. On the financial report, that is your fiscal agent, and that is the same as what's on the invoice. It should be the same person.
And then there's another question. Do we need to submit backups for expenditures?
No, only if you're ever requested, and the exception again is participant payments, tuition, and travel. And those do have specific documentation requirements. If you have one of those items in your budget and you're not sure what you're supposed to send, get with your grant manager and they can send you a list of what is required. and talk you through any instructions or things that you need.
So Cheryl, I had the question in reference to the date paid. I just wanted to clarify because I think this actually happened to me recently. So when we use a procurement card, let's say I purchased something on July 25, but we really don't pay the procurement card until August 5th. So it shows up on our GL on August 5th. So that is the date I put there, right? Date paid
Yes.
August 5th. Okay.
Yes, your general ledger date is what is considered payment. Even if it's an electronic, such as a credit card or other type of electronic
Right.
payment, it is the actual date that's on your GL.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. All right. We are going to move on to the next form or set of forms. And I will just put this caveat because we are running, we have a half hour left. We had scheduled till 3:30. So we don't want to, keep you too long in that type of thing. The next report is the quarterly progress report. But I will let you know that the progress report, the legislative progress report, and the cumulative progress reports look somewhat similar. And so looking at the quarterly progress report, we have enhanced the instructions. They are the same as before, but we've just kind of separated them out visually so that they stand out and are in a numbered list as opposed to getting lost in the paragraph that was there before. And so I think that might help everyone to follow the instructions if they're listed out a little better and they're enumerated. So I'm not going to bore you with the details on that, but please pay attention to these instructions as you complete your reports. And they are a little bit different between the quarterly report and the legislative report, because that legislative report has to be written a certain way for a general audience, and there are restrictions on that that are not on the progress report or the cumulative progress report. So there's just a little bit of change, a little difference. You have to pay attention extra close on the legislative report format. So we'll go over some of that in just a second. But the page 1 looks a little different. We now have radio buttons to select which program you have, and radio buttons for which mechanism or category, depending on if it's Alzheimer's or BRAC type grant. It's either referred to as a grant mechanism or it's referred to as a grant category. They mean essentially the same thing. It is what category grant that you applied for. So you're going to select one of those radio buttons for the appropriate one, and then you're going to fill in your grant number, the grant institution, that is your institution's legal name, your principal investigator's name along with their nominal letters, degrees, and the current reporting period from and to, your project title and date prepared. All of that is fairly similar to what you have seen before in the past. It's just a little different that it's a fillable form now instead of a Word document. I'm hoping you'll like that feature a little better and that it's a little cleaner. All right, your grant progress summary, again, is the same. There is no word limit in the quarterly progress summary. However, there is a rule with our Finance and Accounting Disbursement Office that they will not accept any more than 10 pages of these programmatic reports. And so what we have done is try to limit the primary part of the report to the first 6 pages. And so what you're going to do and when you pull it up, there should be a little box here. Yep, there you go. You click next to there's a box. And if you have additional pages, and you won't know that until you've completed your report, just remember to let us know how many additional pages there are. If you have 12, put the number of additional pages would be 11, because this is your first page of your summary right here. And if you need to write, as much as you need to, please do. Just make sure you put the number of pages there. What is going to go with your invoice, however, is what's on this one page here. So most of you write a pretty good page for your summary part of it. And then if you have any graphs and images and charts and data or anything like that that you feel you need to show progress towards your aims, that is certainly, you're able to do that. But what you would do is skip all the way down to the end, past the primary part of the report, and you would just continue writing right here. And it's free text. There's no limits. There's no like restrictions or a text box or anything. It's just a blank sheet of paper. So it's going to kind of help us because we'll be able to send just these 5 pages that are considered the primary part of the report. And we don't have to try to pick and select what we pull out and send versus it's a set number of pages now. All right, so going back up to the 3rd page. Okay, so that was your summary. Number 2, you're going to pick up with your follow-on funding. There's just a box here. You free type whatever you need to. If there is nothing to report, put none at the time of reporting or just none. Okay, same thing with collaborations. If you have any of that, just fill that in there. If you have any peer-reviewed journals, articles that have been submitted or accepted or published during this period, and if you had a previous reported article that was submitted or accepted, but it has now been published, we need to know that information. And so presentations, the same thing there. And also inventions and patents. These are just sections in here that we need to have, a summary of what has happened during the quarter. All right, same thing here. You're going to fill in the name, title, email, and telephone for the PI. These used to be in little squares. We've just changed the format. That's all. The same assurance statement is there, has not changed. The electronic signature attestation for the PI is in its appropriate spot. Same thing for the sponsored research official, name, title, and so on with the appropriate attestations. And then for Department of Health use only, this is our section where we have our statement as well as our signature. And then the scientific reviewer currently is our Director for Public Health Research, Dr. Reed. And there are a few that are reviewed by, for instance, tobacco cessation has a specialist here that helps review those. All right, so that is the core of that one. Are there any questions on the quarterly progress report?
Cheryl, there's a question in the chat. It says, so to make sure I'm understanding, there is no limit to the summary section. I also thought I heard a 10-page limit. Can you clarify?
Yes, the 10-page limit is based on our disbursements office, the finance and accounting office. They want to avoid having large documents in the electronic payment system. And so they have limited these large programmatic reports, which can be anywhere from 10, 12 pages up to 100. Not our area, but I have seen other program offices that have large, huge reports. And so they've just limited it to the first, usually 2 or 3 pages, and then the signature page. And so, but no more than 10 pages. And with the sensitive nature of the research, it actually is in your benefit to put what you need to on page 2 for your first page of your report for the summary to be, I wouldn't say generic, but be more vague in terms of your science. Maybe just, summarize clearly, obviously, what you need to. But when you get to your graphs and your data and all of that kind of thing, maybe plan on putting that on these other subsequent pages. And so and once you insert, click right here and you start typing, then you're free to write as much as you or as little as you need. The gist of it is, one, you have to show progress from one quarter to the next. If the scientific advisor does not see significant or adequate progress, they're going to want to know why. And so they'll write back to the grant manager and say, I need X, Y, and Z. I need to see this. This looks like a lot very similar to last time's report. There doesn't seem to be a lot of new information. What's going on? Get some more information. And so then your manager has to contact the PI and say, this is the notes that I got back. This is what we need. Please make the corrections. Otherwise, if you're showing adequate progress and it's unique to that grant and to the aims and what you're trying to accomplish. And that's why we have a scientific reviewer looking at it as opposed to me. I can review it for the nuts and bolts of the form and the report itself, but we do have a scientific reviewer that is quite a few pay grades and degrees higher than me that looks at all of these things and will be able to tell us and advise us on what's needed. Okay, and so that is, I hope, answered. There's no limit, but at the same time, there's a limit to what we submit with the packet. So that's where that little nuance of the 10 pages is.
Cheryl, there's another question and it says, also, how do we handle submitting images for the progress report?
Well, we have tried to vet that and insert some charts and pics of different types. And as far as we know, there is no restriction or limitation on it accepting different types of charts and graphs and things of that nature. If you find that you have a problem with that, you need to let me know as soon as possible, because we don't want it to be inhibitive or restrictive at all.
And then there are a couple individuals that have a comment in the chat, and they said that they're having trouble scrolling, and so they're only able to type one line which scrolls. And they'd like that to be reviewed and or corrected.
Okay, I'm making a note right now. And that was, is that on any specific area or just the report in general?
The quarterly progress report for the text boxes.
Okay.
And then there's another comment that says the form that is online does not have the boxes or free lines. Annette, can you give us a clarification as to which form you're looking at, just so we are on the same page?
Yes, we are on the quarterly progress report. Yeah, quarterly progress report.
Yes, she's on the quarterly progress report too. She's saying that the one that she sees online does not have boxes or free lines. Thank you so much,
Okay,
Annette, for that.
It is probably the older one. If you look down at the bottom of the first page, you'll see probably a 7/1/2021. That's the old form. If you're on the new form, it'll say 7/1/2022. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next form, which is.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, I had my hand up in there, but.
Okay, go ahead.
It's about collaborating sites. So for consortium grants with multi-site setup, I wanted to know how we should report for the collaborating sites that are not the main grant recipient. Do those go under collaborations for reporting?
Is this a consortium grant?
Yes.
Okay, if it is a consortium grant, you would put that in the main body of your report. You can, under collaborations, what typically occurs is on a regular grant, any other type of grant, is when you collaborate with other institutions or individuals, specialists or whatnot. That's the type of collaboration you would list there. But on a consortium, that is the whole point of the grant, is to have a very specific outlined collaborative effort. And so that is the aim of the grant, is to have these various outposts, if you will, and as part of the main grant. So put that in the main section of your summary. Again, as many pages as you need to, and you can separate it with headers, however you feel you need to delineate your information.
So there's only going to be one quarterly report for the whole grant, but the main site is reporting on all sites. Is that right?
Yes, and you can either roll the information up, or if you need to enumerate the good job that each one is doing and those efforts, you can certainly put subheaders for each of the collaborative entities and report individually what they're doing. And then in your summary, you're going to summarize the whole.
Gotcha. Okay, so we may just, because they're sending in theirs individually, have subsections from their report and then do overall summaries.
Yes, and that would actually be beneficial to you to set that up in a way that you could just copy paste what you need.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
All right.
Thank
And
you.
that way you're taking from each of their reports and then feeding it into yours. And that's totally fine. All right. If no more questions on that, we're going to move on. The other two are fairly similar, so we won't have, hopefully, I'm just going to highlight what the differences are as opposed to what the new changes are pretty much the same. The legislative progress report, again, radio buttons at the top. If it's an annual report, select that one. If it's the final report, which is the absolute last one for your grant period, then you would mark that one. Again, pay attention to the instructions. I'm not going to bore you with the details. The main one to point out that has been troublesome for us in the past has been number 4. Avoid using personal pronouns and use terms such as research staff or research project staff. We, our, they, us, me, I, he, she. Avoid those personal pronouns, please. We have to basically rewrite some of these summaries in order to take those words out. They cannot go down to the governor's office and legislature with personal pronouns. So please especially take care of that on the legislative progress report. All right, move on. We can move on down to the second page. Yep, second page right here is limited to what you see on the page. That blank space is 500 words. It's limited. There is a box and you can fill in that box and no more. And it is general audience language. And of course, remember, no personal pronouns. And it is to highlight, not only summarize, but really highlight the successes that you have had, or if you've hit some hurdles and challenges. It is your time to shine and to accentuate the positive and put your best foot forward to the governor and the legislature in regards to your project. So that's the one you really want to wordsmith carefully. Okay, and then the same, we have a roll up here. Again, check box if you have none at the time of the reporting or you entered your information here. Radio buttons for funded, not funded, or pending. We had some of this stuff before, but again, it's just an enhancement in how it looks. And at some point, well, particularly with the legislative progress report, it's designed specifically for a mail merge that we have worked from an Excel sheet in this past year and worked phenomenally. And we are taking it to the next level by putting it in a database. But we're building a database for the unit. And so this is our first task or module, if you will, is to upload all of your legislative reports as an electronic data upload, and then be able to hit the button and make magic by creating the annual report a lot simpler and a lot faster and hopefully more efficiently. Same categories as before with your inventions and patents, your peer review. You will notice there are no signatures on this form. It's only 4 pages. You do have, the limitations of, this much information on the legislative report. Okay. So that one's fairly simple and forthright. Just the main thing is remembering you have a word limit and some other specific instructions in how to write the legislative report that's a little different than your regular quarterly or even your cumulative final report. All right, so we're going to move to the last form. Are there any questions on the legislative report? Okay, hearing none, Is there anything in the chat? Hearing none, we're moving on to the last one. All right, so the cumulative progress report, we have left it in Word format for the time being because there are a lot of extra sections where there's specific data, and the formatting of that actually looks pretty good. And we're not at a stage to need that information in the database. And so we are going to do some minor tweaks this year. And then by next year, we'll be in a spot where this may have a little bit more be a little bit more interactive with the database, and you'll see a little more change next year. But for now, just notice that we have made it one cumulative progress report instead of two redundant reports, because they were exactly the same, except one is submitted. If you need a no cost extension, you would complete this report and submit that with your no cost extension request form. If it's not for that purpose, the only other one is a final, and you would mark final. But it's a dual purpose form, and it provides a more comprehensive, which you'll see here in just a second, a little bit more comprehensive places for data and stuff. Again, you're going to mark whatever program, you're going to mark whatever mechanism or category, and fill in the blanks down here. I would like to add a little administrative note. As far as processing the invoices, your from and to dates on your quarterly progress report, your financial report, your expenditure report, and the period covered on your invoice all have to be in the same format. So if you use numbers for your dates, use numbers throughout the whole thing. If you decide to type it out, July 1, 2022 to September 30, 2022, then make sure that you follow the same format on every report. I did not put any restrictions or bells and whistles on that because, again, it's a flexibility issue, but just be aware that that is something that we send back for correction, and it gets bounced back to us from finance and accounting and or DFS if they are not the same. And it's sometimes a little ridiculous, but literally if you have leading zeros on your dates, they need to be leading zeros on all the way through. So they're very particular. It's a thing. So just be aware of that. On the cumulative here, nothing has changed on any of these. The format, as I said, all of the body of the report is exactly the same as last year. Nothing has changed till we get down to the signatures eventually. And this one is kind of sort of the same, except that I added in the electronic signature attestation for both spots. Same thing for our section where we sign. Attestation is there and there. And that's it. Any questions on the cumulative? I would say one additional thing is if you have a new 22 grant that you are have just gotten started, it's really good for you to look at the cumulative report and be aware of the manner in which you need to document certain of these data sections so that you set up your spreadsheets or database or whatever format you're working with so that it has the same breakdown in information such as demographics and so on and so forth. Kind of look ahead to what the end report is so that you'll be sure to capture everything you need. We have 8 minutes left. Are there any questions on anything that we have gone over? We've cleared the chat. Nothing in the chat hanging out. Okay, there are some other forms that are available to you if you need them. The budget change request form, there's a changing PI request form, which is very, very rare. And it's not something that we don't want to happen, but sometimes it does. There's a no cost extension request form. And there's a specific time that you have to submit that because it involves a formal amendment. And we have to have that 3 months in advance. And we've had to really kind of emphasize the due date and no later than the due date for those, because we get caught, oh, it was a month ago. I should have turned it in a month ago. Well, that cuts our time in half that we have to process the amendment package. So please keep to those dates. If you need one, it's there. The exception is for grants that are 54 months. They have been adjusted because of the time it takes for us to pay out those 5-year grants. They are not eligible for a 6-month extension. So those forms are going to be looked at over the summer and determine if there's any minor changes that need to be made. At this point, I don't think that there are, but we are looking at all of our processes. And if there's any changes made to those particular forms, we'll let you know by a mass email similar to the one we did for this announcement, and let you guys all know if there's any changes to that. We also are going to keep up with and keep tabs on any questions that come in and are fielded by the grant managers. We're going to keep a centralized list of those so that we can put those out on the forms library if there are any. And so please go to the forms library and look for a document that says something like revised forms Q&A. And you should be able to review on there. If there is anything that has come up and we've vetted that answer or procedure or made some sort of tweak or correction, you'll be able to find it there and maybe avoid having to, do the whole phone call to your manager and all that if you look at that document first. Please also be sure to contact your grant manager sooner than later. Again, they are your friend, they are your partner in this project for your administration of this grant. Please call and contact them or email them directly, at the first sign of anything you have a question on. And again, the research email is available. I'm available. Bonnie's available, in that order. So we can triage and research and get an answer for you.
Cheryl, there's a question in the chat.
Go ahead.
Do the consortium partners submit their own Excel budget sheets?
Yeah, consortium grants, you will function as a lead agency. And so, yes, you have your own expenditures as the lead agency and those administration type tasks, but you also have the expenditures that relate to your consortium subs. They, send those in, whatever expenditures are on those subs, they come to you as well. And so, yeah, it's kind of a roll up. And so you're responsible to do one invoice to the state for that grant and all that goes on for that grant. I hope that answered the question. And for the ones, I think there's 3 different ones that have consortium grants, but you have one grant manager that manages all 3. So you will have consistent information coming from one person. So we did that on purpose to make sure that you did have the same information, the same whatever, and the same attention to detail on your consortium grant. So just rest assured. And Alexia Denton is our manager for those consortium grants. So please make sure you contact her if you have any other questions. You may think of something after this call. All right. With 3 minutes to spare, are there any final questions? If not, we're going to conclude the webinar. Okay, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your time and attention. Again, if you have any questions, please contact your grant manager and so forth. And let us know, please let us know if you bump into any other little quirks or problems, so that we can get the corrections made ahead of the big push. What we find is we have some early birds that will work on their invoices like now, next 2 weeks. And then there's some that for other reasons, they just turn them in right at the last day. So, and that's fine. But the ones that tend to jump on things earlier, you may be our beta testers, and let us know if you run into any issues. It was very helpful for not just getting your stuff through, but it might help us to get something out as a preemptive strike with a correction to the whole group. So we appreciate your feedback. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can send those directly to me, since I'm the keeper of the forms. If you have any technical issues, you can always contact your grant manager first. And if they don't know the answer, they're going to come straight to me. So we will find you an answer. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good afternoon.